Welcome back. Hopefully, although shorter than you probably want it, know that we will be going out there and having great conversations with people throughout the next couple days. So you don't have to get in all your networking at once. You have more opportunities to do that. The next conversation that we're going to have today is going to be around resilient supply chains, but I just want to take an opportunity to introduce and allow you to welcome Colonel Keven Sampels, United States Air Force retired, serving as the Senior Vice President at Systicon, North America. He retired out of the Air Force with 35 years of experience, has commanded multiple organizations and delivered global logistics support across supply chains, maintenance, and distribution operations. He serves as the Vice Chair of NDIA's Logistics Management Division and sits on multiple boards and multiple foundations. Today, Colonel Samples will be leading a panel on building and securing resilient supply chains. He also paid me to tell everybody that he's very handsome and tall and has great hair. That's $50.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks. I don't quite know what to say to that. The great hair piece, maybe. I don't know.
Takes Venmo.
Yeah, Venmo. Hey, thanks for being here today. It's great to be among a bunch of Marines. I mean that wholeheartedly. I'm an Air Force guy, did 35 plus years in the Air Force, but like General Skalinka said earlier, what we do to serve our nation is absolutely a joint venture, whether you're talking about with the other services or combined venture with partner nations, and certainly with industry and academia. So it's a real honor to be here and get a chance to moderate this panel with all of you. And we have a really phenomenal panel today. So I'll just do a quick introduction of each, and then we'll launch into some questions. And I encourage you to think of questions. We'll reserve about maybe 10 minutes at the end to take your questions. But supply chain risk management is a very hot topic. Ever since COVID, I think someone mentioned it earlier, ever since COVID, the average American has really become much more aware of the term supply chain. Because there was a lot of things that we couldn't get or had challenges getting during COVID. And so it's part of our taxonomy now as an average American. And so supply chain risk management is something that we all are very focused on. And these experts here are truly the experts in the field from within government and industry. So first of all, Mr. A. Darrell Roberts has been the Defense Logistics Agency's Chief Information Officer and Director of the Information Operations since August 2nd of 23. He's responsible for coordinating and integrating IT policies, procedures, and activities in support of DLA and DoD missions and objectives. And prior to his selection as CIO, he was appointed to SES in November of 2019. Hey, Darrell, I just want to thank you for being here. I know how busy you are, how crazy it is at DLA. It's my last 4 years in uniform there. So thank you for making time to be here today. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Kevin.
On the end, we have Mr. Louis Bergeron. He's the Senior VP at Govini, where he leads the defense team supporting the military services and defense agencies. He's a former Navy Surface Warfare Officer with a 20-year active duty and reserve career. Louis also served at the Pentagon on the Joint Staff with the Navy Strategy Team. He's got a phenomenal background, and I've had in-depth talks with him, and he is absolutely a great guy to have on this panel and doing great things at Govini. So thank you, Louis, for being here. I know your schedule is very hectic too.
Thanks, Kevin.
And last but not least, Ms. Carrie Wibben, who's the president of Exiger. She leads strategic go-to-market and engagement across Exiger's most critical accounts and oversees Exiger government solutions. She's been honored with the NDIA's Dr. Desmond G. Newman Award for Supply Chain Excellence and brings extensive military and government experience. She is phenomenal. All three of these people are great. And Carrie, I know, again, we were just talking about your schedule is ridiculous.
Everyone
I was really happy to see you walk in to the auditorium, and thank you for being here. So, I briefly mentioned about supply chain and how it's become something that we're much more focused on than we were, say, 5 years ago. And any conference I go to, which I go to a lot of them, involved in a lot of these types of situations, we talk about data and the importance of data. And how can we use that data to make informed decisions and to make sure that we have what the warfighter needs when they need it? Actually, the saying, just-in-time logistics became very popular, 15 years ago, but we're really not at that stage anymore. We want to make sure that they have what they need when they need it, and not by the nick of time, but in a way that allows them to execute their mission to the very best. So to do that, we have to have a strong and resilient supply chain. So kind of as a scene setter for this, if each of you could answer this question in a couple minutes, and then we'll go into a round of questions. So, hey, Daryl, what do you see as the biggest threat to supply chain resilience when operating in a contested environment?
Thanks for the question, Kevin. I'd probably say the biggest threat is maintaining visibility, real-time visibility, situational awareness through adversarial maneuvers, threats, cyber threats that are occurring for the supply chain. And I say that in the sense of when the general spoke about this earlier, operating in a contested environment, doing logistics, we really view that as in terms of we need to look at our supply chains similar to you do the kill chain, in the sense that they will be attacking our supply chains either through cyber threats or kinetic threats. And so we need to maintain that visibility. And I think we've done a great job, to your point, learning from COVID with partners like Exiger and now Govini, of using information they've gathered commercially that we didn't really focus on previously from a department. We really only looked internal in terms of things that we had awareness of, that we controlled. But we need to work with industry to maintain that control, that visibility from a data perspective. I think the fragmentation of our logistics systems, the lack of implementation of data standards is a threat. Because from a DLA perspective, I was having a conversation in the hall. We don't manage weapon systems. We manage supply chains, we manage parts, classes of supply. And there's a lot of overlap with the services when you talk about spare parts, particularly from an IT perspective across our weapon systems that are a threat that we have to maintain. And then cyber, we talked about that as a domain. We are in a contested environment from a cyber perspective today. At DLA alone, we have about 10,000 cyber threats that we defend against a day. From host nation states, hackers, others, et cetera. But about 10,000 threats are deflected per day here at DLA from a cyber perspective. And we have to work with our industry partners, right? Not just from an IT perspective, but I will say those making the parts within industry to make sure that they're protecting their cyber domain as well. So if you're a vendor, I'm gonna use four letters that you love, CMMC. That is important, and it's a non-negotiable. You've heard Mr. Arrington talk about it. For the defense of our nation, CMMC is an imperative that we have to work with industry to get right, and expand that to our partners within NATO and the UN as well.
Okay, Carrie, I ask you the same question. Greatest threat?
I hate going after Daryl because he says all the right things, and I'm like, what am I going to say? But I do like to tell stories, so I'm going to pick up on that sustainment theme, right? So I think the biggest threat, one of the biggest threats, you could argue all day, which is the biggest, but in contested environments, as we've seen in Russia, Ukraine, our adversaries are pretty sophisticated, and in a lot of cases, they know our weapon systems and they know exactly where and how to target them to deliver a pretty damaging blow in terms of our ability to sustain them in the fight. So one example, pretty recent, we were working with DLA and Army Material Command. They had a particular subsystem on the Bradley fighting vehicle that was very difficult. They couldn't figure out why they could not get this wiring harness and keep it in stock. And they said, Exiger, can you help? And we said, sure. They gave us 86 technical data packages, right? Very ugly drawings, and we were able to ingest them, analyze them through our AI system, and within 2 hours, we helped identify 3 long lead time items. The ALTs and PLTs were completely wrong. The primes didn't know why they had a problem sustaining this wiring harness, and it's because there were 3 copper castings. Why? Because you have to attach that wiring harness to the Bradley so it doesn't fall off in rough terrain. And then we kept going and saw, and told DLA and AMC, oh, by the way, there's also 2 obsolescence notices on these exact copper castings. And they said, okay, that certainly explains the problem. What do we do about that? So we can then pivot from there and not just say, hey, you have a problem, but then kind of move down the solution path, get you a couple hops down that natural decision tree to say, here are some viable alternatives when you're really deep in the technical specifications, the way Govini and Exiger are able to go into the parts level. You can say, here are viable alternatives who are already certified, and here's the pricing information, and here's who we recommend. So that's the power of AI. So kind of, I just went really deep there, right? So kind of pulling it back up. My biggest concern is that in contested environments, and really just generally, we do not have the right pre-positioning or stockpiles, generally speaking, for the weapon systems to be able to sustain them in a fight that is, going to have to endure for months and hopefully never years, but hopefully it's real quick. But even you're talking weeks to months, you're still going to have weapon systems that go down. And if we do not do that type of mapping that I just described all the way down, decomposing those parts, we are not going to have a true appreciation for where we have weakness in our stockpiles, where we have lags in our supply chain, and where we will basically have complete inability to sustain those weapon systems in the fight when it matters most. So that driving that visibility, that mapping, decomposing parts all the way down to minerals, right, to the critical minerals, we'll talk about that hopefully later, is essential to being wartime ready in any conflict. And so that's where there's a huge gap today. We're getting there. We were talking in the hallway, we're making progress, but doing one subsystem on one weapon system, right? And that's a good start, right? We're now doing the Bradley, much more broadly, and we're going to keep going. But the good news is we're starting down that path. The tools and the data, the AI that's available today are accelerating that at a pretty exponential rate and certainly unprecedented. So that's the one I would just kind of pick out of the long list that Daryl covered, and hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
All right, Louis, lucky you. You're number 3.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to Kevin and the panel here. Really honored to be here, and thank you to the Association for Marine Corps Logisticians for opportunity to speak with you today. As Kevin mentioned, I am a retired Navy officer. What he didn't say is that my connection to Marine Corps logisticians started on my first day, first hour within in the Navy. I was down at OCS in Pensacola, Florida, and I had the honor and privilege of a lifetime to meet Gunnery Sergeant Carrie Jones, United States Marine Corps, hoorah, on day 1. Got yelled at a lot, but learned so much from him, and I'm just so honored to be here with Marines. And I've always just appreciated everything you all do day in and day out. To this day, anytime anyone says eyeballs, snap, sir. Or is it snap or click? Snap? All right. Yeah. All right. All right. I know the real ones out there. Okay. Well, thank you so much for the question. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is the kind of the biggest threat to supply chain, especially in contested environments, is really data and software. If you think about it, at the core root of everything, we have to have the right data, as both the Daryl and Carrie were talking about. You have to have the right data. And that data is not just the internal data that the government has, but it's also looking externally into the commercial market. Because your supply chain is built on companies. So a lot of those companies here today, these are the folks that are building the different parts and components needed to fulfill that supply chain. So the first part is understanding that government data and making that government data flat. Right now, we have a lot of silos of excellence in terms of data silos where the Marine Corps may not be able to see what the Army sees. This happens every day. DLA does a fantastic job of being able to level that playing field, but there's still just individual service level data silos silos of excellence in terms of data. The second is software. What we see a lot of is there's government owned and operated, so government off the shelf, as well as commercial off the shelf software, each doing a little bits and pieces of that supply chain and doing kind of things well, but well within a specific area. You have to have both that data flat and look both externally and internally into what the government is, and externally mean out into the commercial market. And then two, you have to have software that pulls that together. Once you have that set, then you can start thinking about the demand planning. Because what we're really talking about in contested logistics environments and supply chains in those contested environments is, how do I think about the demand? How do I think about the forecast? How do I think about it in terms of a proactive or predictive way to help the warfighter in the field? We can talk about that in terms of factory to fight. When you think about the demand signal that's coming from the warfighter, we can model that today. And Daryl's team at DLA has done a fantastic job of doing a lot of this work, looking at the sustainment load and burden, and basically running models. If you're using naval strike missiles, what are all the components of that missile? What are the different systems that are supporting it? If you have radars that are on small atolls, or you're inside the first island chain, we should be able to understand the operating hours, the failure rates, and the spares needed to keep those systems running. That's the first step, is being able to see that sort of that demand signal from the warfighter, and then start thinking through that chain back through the logistics. So thinking about, if I'm in the first island chain in the Luzon Strait, or I'm somewhere in the South China Sea or in the Philippines, I should be able to start back planning that to the industrial base. And then think about the different factories that need to be spun up. What we can start doing is running those things using the right data and the right software to be able to predict where we're going to see shortages after a potentially protracted engagement. Oftentimes, we think about in terms of war games, and we stop at maybe day 5 or 6, or maybe even 60, because we start to see the problems start to crop up. If we are able to look at the data, we're able to look at the different systems that the Marine Corps operates, the Army operates, the Navy operates, and Air Force operates. Let's look and see what's in common between those different places. Let's aggregate that demand, and let's be able to provide our warfighters with that just in need, just in case, and just in time for these fights.
Thanks, Louis. So already from General Skalinka and some of the comments made here this morning by this panel, we talk about AI. I mean, you just can't have a conversation in practically any part of life right now without someone mentioning AI. And clearly that's the case in our community. In fact, it's kind of funny. Sometimes you'll hear senior leaders, and I'm definitely not referring to General Skalinka because I think he's got a handle on it, but there are people who say, I don't really know what AI is, but I know I need it. Okay, so it's like what they used to say about logistics. I don't know, exactly what that means, but I know I got to have it. So you're the experts. You are using AI in DLA, and certainly with Louis and Carrie, your companies are heavily using AI to accomplish what your focus is. But Daryl, inside DLA, what specifically are you doing to implement the use of AI, and how is it impacting your ability to mitigate the risk that's associated with operating logistics in a contested environment?
Yeah, Louis and Carrie touched on a lot of things that are important, that's really driving what we're trying to do with AI. The pre-positioning of material, right? The data, the various systems. I think a recent meeting I went to, there's over 300 logistics IT systems across the department. And a large majority of those are not using logistics data standards, which makes this problem much more complex when you talk about the joint fight that we're going in. And so we're in a unique position at DLA because we work with all the services, we work with all the COCOMs. So that gives us visibility that a lot of folks really don't have in terms of how you set your AI journey. So we've really been focused on 3 areas that have been SecDef priorities. So audit, my other favorite word, and transparency. We have about 56 AI models that we're working on that we call Catalyst, looking at audit transparency, the ability to share data, interoperability. Optimizer, how do we optimize our supply chain operations? So we're integrating that within our supply chain strategies across the 9 supply chains, which will enable us to move to modeling and simulation, utilizing AI and other components.
Pull the mic about 6 inches closer.
Yeah.
You're looking out well.
They told me not to touch it. Let's do it. It's always the IT guy that has the IT problems.
Yeah, much better.
But Optimizer is looking at effective operations across our supply chains, moving us to modeling and simulation. Most of us in here know whenever there's war games, logistics, the last thing that folks think about. And so we're trying to integrate ourselves in those named war games, but also how do we provide ourselves the ability to war game, use those vignettes that are happening in those war games to inform ourselves as well. And then lastly, forecaster, working with the services to do better demand planning and forecasting, not just looking internal at our data, but taking that data to now work with our industry partners to give industry a signal to say, hey, here's what we think we're going to buy, here's what we think we need, and how do we now position ourselves to do that from an industry perspective. I think that will inform things like tech data packages where we have obsolescent parts and things of that nature. So we can look at advanced manufacturing, organic manufacturing, things of that nature. So we're really looking at this in terms of being more proactive and predictive in the nature of what we're doing at DLA with the services, as opposed to being reactionary to those service needs.
Yeah, that is so needed, and it's great to see you making the advancements that you have already put in to play, and I know you're working on a lot more. Just briefly, you know, I grew up hearing the term fairy dusted. You know, logistics has for far too long been in war games, and just assumptions were made that whatever was going to be needed was going to be there when it is needed, and that's just not the case. But I do see both through DLA and through some of the stuff that the joint staff is doing, we are now starting to actually exercise logistics like it should be, and not living by assumptions that may or may not come true. So I really appreciate that about DLA's efforts. That's phenomenal. Carrie, for you, I wanted to ask about something that I think a lot of us have heard about stuff on the periphery, but I know you're dealing with some of the specifics about single point failures. You know, parts that are only available for one source, and maybe they're only available from a source that we shouldn't even be using. So I know within your company, you have the capability to drill down to the lowest levels and identify those types of situations. I was wondering if you could maybe give me an example of a success that you've had where you've identified something where, hey, we don't have a backup supplier, or, oh my gosh, we're buying this from China or someplace that we shouldn't be. Does something come to mind where you can talk about a case like that?
Yes, many things come to mind. So we were recently looking at the Constellation class frigate. I'm going to go from my Army example to a Navy, Marine Corps example. By the way, I married a Marine. I'm almost a Marine. I'm a soldier, West Point grad, but by proxy, I think I'm a Marine now because I married one. But the Constellation class frigate, you might be FFG 62, you might be familiar with it, hasn't left the dry dock, $6.9 billion of investment later, significantly overrun, often the target of a lot of congressional testimony, and it's an incredibly troubled program. So the critical kind of lesson learned, I think, just in general, but just the Constellation class is a really good example. We have got to start thinking about supply chains and resilience at the point of design and engineering, all the way to the left. When we don't do that, you end up in this situation. So with the Constellation class frigate, when we took a look at, again, like not a lot of parts in the system for it, but there's obviously weapon systems on the Constellation class frigate. So we did a deep dive into the Aegis and the LM-2500 engine. So what happened is the Navy, well-intended, took a proven design, the FREM European design, as a starting point. They wanted to be fast. They wanted to be able to develop it very quickly. And so, but then what they did is they adapted it to US Navy standards, and then they started layering on top all these additional requirements. We want it to be, we want 10 more launchers. We want it to be 20% or 10% lighter. We want it to be 30 feet longer. And even the engine, which was already a LM-25 engine, was a already troubled supply chain. They said, okay, let's actually make this a diesel gas hybrid engine that's never been tested. So you just layer on these standards and these additional requirements, so you're building on really a broken foundation. All of that is avoidable. As we went deeper into the Constellation class frigate, we saw thousands of parts that were single source, had right to repair and other very tough challenges associated with them. We saw hundreds of parts that had seen 1,000% year-over-year price increases. So it was very clear, and I could keep going. It's a pretty exhaustive deep dive, but the big sort of bluff on it was, is that a Marine Corps term too? Bluff, bottom line up front, is I think it's a DoD wide. Yeah, it's an Army term. But the bluff is, gosh, what if we had done this type of analysis 5 years ago? We'll look at what we could have avoided. So, and one of the suppliers, just to kind of pick up on your single source question, was SPS Technologies, right? So SPS Technologies just suffered a 4-alarm fire just north. It's a specialty fastener manufacturer just north of Philadelphia. And we were actually monitoring that supplier, very familiar with it because we were monitoring the Bradley fighting vehicle, but realized there was actually, they had parts on the Constellation as well. So we were able to quickly pivot and say, okay, when we alerted DLA and AMC about the SPS Technologies, we were able to say, very quickly, and this doesn't just impact the Bradley, it impacts, all these other weapon systems, because we can say, okay, these fasteners, there's actually 38,000 NSNs that's SPS Technologies, parts they manufacture for DoD, mapping those all the way up to the weapon system designation codes. And then we saw 3,500 of that 38,000 that were single source, sole sourced, right? So again, the next question is, well, what do we do about that? Do we have any alternatives, right? Well, this is not just, specialty fasteners, it's cadmium plated specialty fasteners. You have to be able to go very deep into the technical specifications to identify viable alternative suppliers. So in that case, we were able to do that quick analysis. For some of them, there were viable alternatives. For many, there unfortunately weren't. So if we kind of had that visibility up front, we could say, let's not design this weapon system to have reliance on parts that are very scarcely available. If we can just make a small tweak to the specification, or maybe you don't need the heating resistance at, 2,000 degrees, it could be a little bit lower. You actually open up the supplier base considerably for a lot of these parts. So those are the kinds of things that we're able to do. And I know Govini does a lot of the same analysis but kind of picking up on my opening remarks, you have to be able to go to that depth to understand exactly what these parts and components are made of, or you will not get it right, even if you are trying to do the right thing all the way to the left and create a very resilient weapon system and associated supply chain. So many examples, I could keep going, but that's probably the best one.
Okay, thank you. Louis, I think Exiger and Govini have, somewhat similar capabilities, different strengths or whatever. But in your world, tell me what you are able to get your arms around data-wise, because I know you have a far reach of data, both in the defense industrial base and, of course, across the government and so on. How are you using your access to data and your internal capabilities to analyze that data to, again, mitigate the risks of our supply chain being negatively impacted?
Yeah, and I think So at Govini, we're a defense acquisition software. So the kind of the compelling thing that we bring to the market is that we go across the entirety of the acquisition lifecycle. So we think about it in terms of applications. We have 6 applications within our software. And it starts with supply chain. So that's the kind of river that runs through all the different applications that we have. So as Carrie's mentioned and Daryl has as well, like you have to understand your supply chain down to the part level and even down to the critical mineral, and to understand just that complexity and how things are moving through that supply chain in terms of flow. The second application we have is science and technology. So we think about things even kind of to the left of it. As you're thinking about the design, there's obviously design for sustainment, but there's also emerging technology that's out there. There's probably not a day that goes by that Marines don't say, hey, I wish I had this or I wish I had that. We've worked, there's probably a dozen different organizations within and technology accelerators that are looking at early stage companies in terms of how can I have them bring autonomous systems to the Marine Corps? So how do I kind of automate some of the different logistics planning, whether that's automated unmanned surface vessels that bring logistics from ship to shore, or various different drones and UAVs to automate different logistics functions. So who are the companies that are doing that? How can you quickly identify those, and how do you quickly monitor and bring them into your ecosystem? And the second is really production side. So production, or the third, sorry, is production, then sustainment, and then we talk about logistics and modernization. And when we talk about production and sustainment, we always think about the kind of the 3 ingredients that you need to make anything. You need the materials. So these are the parts, the raw materials, all the different sub-assemblies. You need the infrastructure, which is the facilities. So the factories, if it's a new production, the depot level maintenance or aircraft hangars, if you're doing maintenance and sustainment. And then third, the workforce. So you need the workforce engaged, and you need skilled tradespeople and kind of the new construction and skilled maintainers and logisticians for that kind of in the field areas. If you think about it, you have to have all 3 of those in alignment in a kind of a Venn diagram way. If I have the parts and I have the facilities, I don't have the workforce that's skilled and trained, I'm not going to be able to make something, I'm not going to be able to sustain something. So you have to have all 3 of those in alignment. So today we're working across that acquisition lifecycle at program offices all the way to that logistics edge, and I'll talk a bit about that. So we're working across the Defense Department, as well as a little bit in the federal civilian and intel communities, but our bread and butter is in the defense world, and that's what we do day in and day out. We bring the external data. We're able to match it with government data. In fact, today we just received our Navy ATO for authority to operate at IL-5, which is really exciting for us, and we're working across different areas across the entire government on how do we bring in government data to make that match that I talked about at first, of that connecting that external data with the internal data. I'll talk about 3 workflows and then I'll hand it back. So 3 AI workflows that we have. So AI is really driving us in terms of how do we get speed to our customers. So our customers are overburdened. You've got too many things going on. You've been using manual processes too long. You're using multiple different systems that are probably not the most intuitive and probably not the most user-friendly, I'm willing to guess. So we try to take a workflow look at that. So what are the things you're doing that just chew up your time? What chews up your headspace, and what's just dragging you down in terms of performance? And let's figure out how to automate that. So I'll talk about 3 that are ongoing. Oh.
Brother, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We are running out of time.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
yeah, if you could just.
Yep. One is part replicator. So as Carrie mentioned, how do I identify parts quickly based on form, fix, function, as well as all the technical specifications? You just add in a NIN, put it in the system, and you're going to have matches across the entirety of around 8 million different parts from the DLA DLA data. Second is a market expert. So how do I identify a different market? So if I'm thinking about a weapon system, I may want to be looking at microelectronics or gyroscopes or things like propulsion units or wiring harnesses. I can simply add that in, and I'm going to see AI-enabled market research in a click of a button and be able to generate a report. And third is the logistics application. So the logistics application is basically, how do I get things around a battlefield? Today, we're working on that for next generation command and control with the Army, and are basically field tested with the Army in basically helping them with their route planning, their convoy planning, and how to get things to soldiers out in the fight. Thank you.
Sorry for compressing you a little bit. I just want to make sure we have time for the audience. So I'm going to ask for a lightning round. I'll ask each one of you a question, a short answer if we can. So NDIA, been around forever, got a lot of folks that have worked there a long time. How are they accepting AI and everything that you're trying to do in your world?
Everyone loves it. No, so it's a journey. We are on a data acumen journey to one, make sure that people understand the value that it brings. And we're also talking about it in terms of a force multiplier, not a replacement, right? So when we talk about AI, I like to refer to it as our digital employee. Don't look at it as a replacement, but how does this become an assistant, an agent for the workforce so that they can be more effective in what they're doing every day. So we are going through that period of adoption. Everyone loves their chat GPTs and things of that nature, but it's going to be a journey. And I think for us, we're focused on how do we get return on investment in terms of supply chain effectiveness so we can put more money back to the warfighter from a DLA perspective, but then just having the journey of incrementally making people more comfortable with the AI as an individual to improve their day-to-day work.
Carrie, you have an Army background, but you said you're married to a Marine.
Yes, sir.
So how do we who have military experience and are now in industry continue to build the trust that's required between industry, the government, and academia to, as a nation, do what's right for our country to advance our capabilities?
Oh, that's a good one. I thought you were going to ask me about critical minerals. I was looking forward to talking about that. Anyone wants to talk about that afterwards? My favorite topic. Yeah, I love that question actually, because I mean, what I've found, and I'll say, you know, I have 6 years on the other side, on the dark side in industry, but I still wake up every day feeling like I am putting points on the board for Team USA. There's not a day that goes by where I feel like I've lost touch with the mission or my passion. I was very fortunate early in life. I mentioned I went to West Point. I found my passion and my purpose and my why very early on. It took different flavors throughout my career and had different focal points. But really in the last 5 years of my government career as the head of counterintelligence and security at the Office of Secretary of Defense, is where I learned to appreciate all of you, frankly. Very focused on the China problem, trying to understand how the hell does China know our supply chains better than we do and how to target them very effectively, steal our intellectual property, while we were playing literally no defense, much less playing any offense. Why? Because we weren't mapping our IP. Below, we lose visibility. It's a black box below tier 1. We don't know our supply chain. So that's where I was like, wow, I really need to broaden my aperture and get to know these acquisition folks, these logisticians, because they are the key to solving this massive national security problem, biggest threat we face, right? I could not do it without them. So I learned then, and then I really quickly pivoted to saying, how the hell has China got this visibility and we don't? It's because they were leveraging AI, they were leveraging advanced technology, and we in the department were not, full stop. So I was like, well, we got to change that. So that's when I went to market, looked for advanced tools, found Exiger, long story short, ended up coming here to stand up the federal practice. That continuity, that single thread I just drew from my counterintelligence world, very singularly focused, expanding into appreciating and needing to work with multidisciplinary professionals like all of you to solve a problem that matters more than anything, and needs to be solved more desperately than anything, understanding our supply chains, protecting our intellectual property, stopping the theft. It's a team sport. We cannot do it without industry, cannot do it without AI. So it takes all of us. Right? And that is, you know, I will debate this with anyone who wants to. That is the fight that matters most to us, to our children, to the generations of the future. So this is a team sport. So I would say short answer, I know you told me to be short and I wasn't, but short answer is find people who have that same purpose and mission and passion and like-mindedness and just focus on that and get shit done together, because that is what makes a difference, right? It's a team sport, but I have never, once I found people who understood the problem and the mission, and we could just all focus on solving it together. It doesn't matter what uniform you're wearing, civilian, what star, how many stars you have on your shoulders. It's about getting the mission done and supporting the warfighter. And so that's my short answer.
And that is exactly why I love you. You are phenomenal. You're passionate. All three of you are passionate about what you're doing. But Carrie, I know you feel that way. I hear it out of you every time I hear you speak. So that's why I asked you that question. Okay.
good one.
Someone asked her a question about critical minerals to get me out of the doghouse. Okay, Louis,
Sir.
tell me what we need to do in our community to move forward on implementing the technology that's required to get us to the next level. Again, try to keep it short.
Yeah, I'll keep it pretty short. So businesses need three things. We need a clear demand signal from the government, contracts, and funding. Those are the three essential elements that businesses need. The government needs three things back in return. They need capability and capacity from the AI systems, and they need things on budget and on schedule. So if we can think about those different areas, that's how we build trust between industry and government, as both have to be willing to meet each other and be willing to perform. Just like Carrie, I came from the Pentagon. I was in the J5. I saw numerous war games. I read all the plans. None of them really took into account the kind of the industrial-based situation that we had. I often kind of say that old, I think it's Omar Bradley, that the amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics, winners talk industrial base. Because Omar Bradley talked about that when he had full production and the full command economy, the entirety of the Freedom's Forge moment had been going on. He just had a logistics problem. We have a logistics problem and an industrial-based problem, and we have to look at that industrial-based problem first and foremost. And so this has to be a government and industry collaboration and partnership, built on trust and built on excellence.
Yeah, same points that Carrie made, and that's the same way about you. I've been around you enough to know you're passionate, and you guys
Got
are
it.
both driving hard to do the right thing. And same thing with Daryl. Having worked in DLA, knowing where we were and where we are now, kudos to all three of you for all your hard work. You're really making a huge difference.
You too.
It's okay.
You too.
And my hair is not bad. Small joke. Okay, questions. Who's got questions? Yes, ma'am.
This one's for you, Daryl. So you talked a little bit about CMMC and the requirements for small business. So there is a platform in the Department of Defense to actually certify small businesses in CMMC at no cost. Do you feel like that is adequate to support the demand signal from small business? And how might DLA be able to support that project in the Office of Small Business Affairs?
Yeah, I think to be determined, right? Having built previous platforms like Pi for small business and others, I'll say it's going to scale based upon need, right? I'm confident that the way they've built that is, hey, here's our anticipation, but until you actually get that demand signal from industry, as long as the architecture is structured in a way that you can expand and scale it, I think you'll have the ability to do so. But you have to make it easy. You have to involve industry up front, right? So if it's a hard tool to use, right, to Louis' point, we have to bring industry in so that they feel heard and part of the team, as opposed to, hey, here's a tool, go figure out how to use it. Because that discourages industry from coming in as well, right? Our bureaucratic processes discourage small business. So if they think about it in terms of how do you involve them up front, as opposed to if you build it, they will come. Meetings I've been in, that's the approach they're taking.
Who has a critical minerals question? Yes, sir.
In an era where technology advances society outside of Congress, where they don't see any members access to intelligence and spies,
Is our access to precious metals to bring these technologies into fruition at risk?
I didn't hear the.
Yeah, you're gonna have to do that again,
So
Brian.
just the last part. Just the last part. I think.
Is our access to precious metals to bring these newer technologies into fruition at risk?
Yeah. Can I take that?
Please.
Okay.
I beg for that.
Yeah. So China, my favorite topic. China is. I think this is hopefully well known with this crowd and the world. China is weaponizing the periodic table, right? They have spent decades gaining the level of dominance over us that they now have, where we are, for 10 critical minerals, we are 100% import reliant on China. For another 30, we are over 50% import reliant on China. We do not solve that problem anytime soon. Right? They spent decades getting themselves into this position and having this advantage over us. They are now executing that playbook very strategically, but increasingly aggressively, right? With the latest round on heavy rare earth elements. But how do we make sense of that, right? Your question, right? What does that mean? Okay, that sounds really bad. What does that mean? Well, again, it kind of goes to that point around needing to, for Department of Defense, right? How does that translate to the weapon systems that we need to rely upon in any, early stage conflict? Well, you have to have the right data and technology and artificial intelligence to map those parts all the way down to the hole in the ground to understand that, when the White House calls down and says, okay, antimony, gallium, germanium, DLA, how bad is this, right? Antimony, DLA sees, sorry, no offense, DLA, I love DLA, and I know why, it's not anyone's fault. DLA sees what they needed to see in FLIS, 500 parts, right? Because they weren't extracting all of the data that they could have been because they didn't need all that extra data. When we look in our system, because of one of the companies we acquired that DLA jointly invested in and sponsored their ATO, XSB, this company we acquired, we can see over 11,000 parts that have antimony. And then we can map them all the way up to the WSDC, the Weapon System Designation Code, with essentiality codes to say, okay, actually for antimony, we see over, I believe it was 100 weapon systems and over 1,000 parts that contain antimony in critical capacities. So that weapon system will be rendered inoperable if that particular critical mineral is not available to manufacture that part. And we can't get it anywhere else. That's just the critical mineral part. We could talk processing, we can talk refining, but yeah, it's a problem. And it's not one we have a quick solution to, not even close. Investing in MP materials, good start. It's going to be years before we actually see any good or anything positive in terms of reducing our reliance on China come from that.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Carrie's talking about, I mean, DLA participated in a White House meeting on strategic materials last week for that very purpose, right? So part of the role that we're trying to play on behalf of the department is, from a disposition perspective, how do we identify these strategic materials up front so that from a recycling perspective, right, we can recoup those? Because a lot of these, there is a lot of recyclability of strategic materials in these parts, but by the time we figure it out, we've disposed of them. Mm-hmm. And when we dispose of them, guess where we send it? China. Right? And so that is a very important thing that, to Carrie's point, having that data, understanding how many NINs actually contain strategic materials as weapon systems are built, if we can identify that up front, so it never comes to DLA for disposition. You get it to the point of what's the return on investment of recycling that material before it gets to disposal. That's really the plan that we're trying to work towards while we try to solve this problem.
So, sir, I see your hand, and I apologize, but I'm getting the hook over here, okay? So, and I don't want to fight him because it's clearly he can take me.
He paid me to say that he's also strong.
All right. Hey, I want to thank you, Louie, Carrie, and Daryl. Your passion, your drive for everything you're doing is so important for our nation. So I appreciate you making time to come here today to talk about it. You guys are probably going to be around for a little bit, although I'm sure you may be heading back soon. Catch them in the hallway, and thank you for letting us talk about supply chain risk management today. All right, have a good rest of the day.